As we've talked about already, whenever you're giving a speech, you need to know your audience. When you're doing a persuasive speech, this is especially critical. So, we talked about knowing our audience and who's in our audience. And we can break this down into two categories again, two broad categories: demographics and psychographics. And I know we've talked about this before, but these are important comments to know. When you're asked to speak to someone, to speak to a group, ask your host, the person who's inviting you, who will I be speaking to? Tell me about the audience. If it's a persuasive speech, tell me where they stand on this. Do they already support abortion rights, or are they against it? This is critical for your speech design. Knowing where your audience stands helps you design a message that can reach your audience, whoever it might be, whether they agree with you or disagree with you. So once you know who your audience is, then you design your speech. If your audience is opposed to your views, let's say you're talking to a pro-life group and you're arguing in favor of the right to abortion. You're not arguing that abortion is right. You're just arguing that there should be a legitimate right for someone to choose that option. So how do you go about this? These people oppose your views. Well, if the majority of the audience opposes you, then you still design your speech to reach that audience. You're probably not going to persuade them, but if you do a good job, you can plant a little seed that grows in their mind, and it'll help them eventually see this issue from a different point of view. That is an effective strategy for persuasion. It is an effective persuasive speech if you can plant that seed. A persuasive speech is not effective only if you persuade people to do what you want them to do. If that were the case, then we would all do a lot of things that we didn't want to do when somebody persuades us to do them against our will. So that usually does not happen. It's very, very difficult for one speech to persuade people who are opposed to you. It's virtually impossible. But if you plant those seeds, you can build incremental change. You can gradually move them along a scale, and other people will come along and add to that over time and persuade people. All right. So you're changing their understanding and opening the door for future thought on that topic. So if the audience already agrees with you, then that doesn't sound too challenging, does it? I'm going to give a speech on why you should work out every day. All right. The answer is duh. Everybody knows we should do that. Duh. All right. So what do I need to do? I need to do the same thing we do in every form of persuasion. I need to overcome your objections. So we need to analyze, yes, my audience already agrees with me, but how do I get them to take it to the next level? How do I get them to take action based on what they believe? What are the biggest objections people have when somebody tries to persuade them to join a fitness program? I don't have time. The number one objection is time. So how do we overcome that objection? Well, to effectively overcome that, we appeal to logos. Many, many studies show that small workouts, even as small as 6 or 7 or even 2 minutes a day of intense workouts, can add up and can actually change people's health. 2 minutes a day. So you've overcome their objection of time. Okay, so what's another objection? Yeah, I guess I probably could make the time, but it's just once I come home and I sit down and I want to rest, that's a legitimate objection. How do you overcome that? You've got to paint a word picture. You've got to get them to visualize the benefits of the results. Get them to visualize the results of that effort. You can motivate them to take that effort. So these are persuasive strategies. If your audience disagrees with you, you try to get incremental change, a little bit of change. If your audience does agree with you, get them to take action. Get them off their butts off the couch and get them out the door to that gym or whatever it might be. This is a big question. If we're talking about knowing your audience, A big question is, how do I know what my audience thinks or believes? And the answer is, you have to do research. So, how do you do research on your audience? You actually have to do research on your audience. How would you do a speech differently? How would you design your speech if I said, you'll be speaking to a predominantly Black evangelical church in Detroit, versus you'll be speaking to a group of Catholic businessmen in Troy? And I use the word businessmen deliberately there because that's how the audience was described to me, men. Okay, so what would be different about these audiences? What different experiences and expectations would they have? You can think of many. I actually have a funny story about a professor that I work with, or used to work with. I think this professor has retired. But I was talking to her in the hallway one time. This is a religious studies professor who was talking to me in the hallway about this course, about public speaking. She's like, what did I do wrong? I was asked to speak at this Presbyterian church on the east side of Detroit, and it's a predominantly Black church. And so I told them that, the blood of Jesus probably isn't really important for our salvation. And they didn't like that. And I wonder why. Like, well, did you stop and think about your audience? Did you design that message for this audience or not? Obviously not. So she put her message ahead of her audience. She did not take the audience's beliefs, strongly held beliefs, into account when she delivered this speech. And this is a religious studies professor, someone who should at least know the basics of public speaking. All right. So think about this. How about, here's another example. What would you say, what would be different if I were to tell you you'll be speaking to a group of college students from Yale University versus you'll be speaking to a group of college students from Wayne State University? All right. Would you be a little more intimidated if I said Yale? Most of my students in class would raise their hands and say yes. Why? What's different about those students compared to Wayne State students? What demographic differences? The Yale students probably have much higher SAT scores or ACT scores. They probably come from much wealthier families if we're categorizing these things. So both of those factors could be daunting. So what might you do differently for those two audiences? Do you think you might try to work in some bigger words if you're talking to the students from Yale? You might. Do you think you might practice a few more times? You might, right? Does this downplay the credibility of Wayne State students? It should not. But we make these judgments based on these differences that we know about our audiences. So in addition to knowing your audience demographics, you need to know your audience's psychographics. And we've talked about this before, but psychographics refers to your audience's attitudes, values, beliefs, religious and political affiliations, hobbies, interests, and activities. If you're speaking to a group, if you're speaking to the ski club, for example, or a snowboarding group, all right, you know one thing about their activities. They love to go down the hill. They probably love to go fast, and they love it when it snows, right? So you've got those things going for you. You understand one particular thing about them. Let's say I'm speaking to a group of documentary filmmakers. I know they might disagree with me about some topics, but we speak the same language when it comes to shooting, editing, and directing a documentary film. So those things are psychographic characteristics of an audience. Understanding those is critical to you. You can design a speech that relates to those people if you understand those psychographic characteristics. Here's a psychographic example. How would your speech be different if I told you you were going to be speaking to the College Republican Club, and I don't know if we even have one, versus you're going to be speaking to the university's LGBT club? All right, we kind of imagine that those two groups are on different ends of the political spectrum. So what would you do differently? You would need, regardless of what your message is, you would have to tailor it to those groups. right? Whether you support those groups and their beliefs or you don't. You might be speaking about a totally neutral topic. You might be speaking about, I've given speeches on self-defense. I'm a martial artist, and I give speeches and demonstrations and seminars on self-defense techniques and how to protect yourself. And so both of these groups, this could be completely a neutral topic. Both of those groups might receive that topic in exactly the same way. All right. So some categories don't require as much tailoring of the message, and some categories do. All right. If you're trying to persuade these groups to vote for a particular candidate, then you're going to need to really have a strong case if you're going to go against their perceptions. So in order to know your audience, you need to do research on your audience. One way is informal research. You can talk to your classmates when you're walking in and out of class or while you're sitting there waiting for class to start. That's kind of an informal way of doing research, and it's not quite enough. So you need to actually do what is called formal audience research. You have to poll your audience to find out where they stand on the issue you want to talk about. So how do we do formal audience research? You have to conduct a poll of your audience. And this means that for your persuasive speech, you're going to need to design and conduct a survey that helps you identify where your audience stands on what it is you're trying to persuade them about. So regardless of what your ideas are, your speech must be designed to reach the majority of those people. Let's say, for example, you're doing a speech on abortion. You're trying to persuade people either for it or against it. And let's say 75% of the people are in favor of abortion rights. Let's just hypothetically throw that number out. It's probably not that high. But let's say even 60%. Let's say even 55% of your audience supports abortion rights. And 40% are against it and 5% are not sure. You would still design your speech to reach the majority. So that means if your majority disagrees with you, you still design a speech to persuade the people who disagree with you. Always design your speech to reach the majority of people in your audience. So one way to do this is SurveyMonkey. Another way is Google surveys, but you might have to pay a fee, a small minimal fee for Google surveys. But SurveyMonkey, you can do this for free. You can design a multiple choice survey on SurveyMonkey, send the link to me, and I will share it with your audience. Your audience will complete that, and then you'll compile that data and find out where people stand on the issue you're going to be talking about. And it doesn't have to be something about abortion. It could be, where do you stand on electric cars? Do you support electric cars, or do you support hybrid cars or gas-powered cars? All right, it could be any topic of your choosing, but it's got to be a serious topic that involves our intellect, that helps us think about something and that tries to actually move us and change our opinions, our beliefs, our attitudes, or our behaviors. That is the goal for a persuasive speech.